I never could have predicted how a single, seemingly insignificant moment would alter everything I thought I knew about someone. But now, when I look back, I realize that night marked the beginning of a change. One I wasn't prepared for, one I could never have foreseen. My name is Maya, and for the past 2 years, I've lived in an apartment with my housemate Jordan. At first, our decision to live together was purely practical. Splitting rent, managing household chores, and maintaining a respectful distance. We had our separate routines, our own schedules, and while we got along just fine, we never became anything more than acquaintances living under the same roof. Jordan, though, was the kind of guy people naturally gravitated toward. He had this effortless charm about him that made everyone feel at ease. Calm and easygoing. He seemed to glide through life without a care, always managing to make people laugh with his dry wit and subtle sense of humor. There was a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself, never brash or loud, just a sense of self-assurance that didn't demand attention, but still commanded respect. Our dynamic was easy, comfortable, nothing extraordinary, just two people sharing a space and respecting each other's boundaries. But that was the way I saw it. Until that night. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Each of your shares is not only a motivation for us but also contributes to spreading value to the community. One evening, after a grueling, exhausting day at work, I dragged myself through the front door of the apartment, barely able to keep my eyes open. My feet ached from the relentless pressure of my high heels, and every muscle in my body screamed for rest. All I wanted was to collapse onto the couch, sink into its cushions, and let the world fall away for the rest of the night. I shuffled toward the kitchen, trying to ignore the fatigue weighing me down, when I suddenly heard the unmistakable sound of running water coming from the bathroom. A few seconds later, Jordan appeared in the hallway, stepping out of the bathroom with the steam still clinging to the air around him. He was freshly showered, his damp hair tousled, droplets of water clinging to the collar of his shirt. He was wearing nothing but a pair of gray sweatpants, his bare skin glistening in the soft light of the apartment, and a towel casually draped over his shoulders, as if he hadn't a care in the world. "Rough day?" he asked casually, leaning against the doorframe as he ran a towel through his hair with one hand, his gaze lifting to meet mine. I let out a long, exhausted sigh, kicking off my shoes as I tried to shake the tension from my shoulders. "You have no idea," I muttered, my voice a mixture of frustration and relief. A faint, knowing smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Want a drink?" he asked, the offer as easy as breathing, like he always knew exactly what I needed. I paused for a moment, considering the idea. My first instinct was to retreat into my solitude and silence, but something about his presence made the idea of sharing a quiet drink seem oddly comforting. "Actually, yeah, I do," I replied, my voice softer than usual, and I could feel a small shift in the air between us. He moved to the kitchen with a smooth, almost effortless grace, the faintest hint of a smile still playing at his lips. He poured me a glass of wine, the deep red liquid shimmering in the dim light, and handed it to me with a casual flick of his wrist. As our fingers brushed in the exchange, the contact was light, almost imperceptible, but there was something in the moment that made my heart flutter unexpectedly. It was just a touch, yet it sent a surge of warmth rushing through me, a warmth that lingered long after he'd stepped back. Something about the way he looked at me, like he was seeing me in a way I hadn't quite understood until then, made me wonder if perhaps I hadn't been paying attention before. I tried to brush it off. It was nothing. We were housemates, friends even, and there was nothing unusual about unwinding together after a long day. At least, that's what I told myself. Still, that strange warmth lingered from the brief touch of his fingers, and as the days passed, I couldn't help but feel a subtle shift in the air between us. I tried to ignore it, but the more I told myself it meant nothing, the more certain moments stood out, things I hadn't noticed before. It started with the small things, the way Jordan would linger in the kitchen just a little longer whenever I happened to be there. He'd casually lean against the counter, as if waiting for me to finish what I was doing. His presence so quiet that it almost felt like he was trying not to disturb me but still wanting to be near. There were the moments when his gaze followed me around the apartment, not in a way that felt invasive, but rather as if he were watching with a quiet interest, as if he were seeing something more than what was simply in front of him. And his voice, it was subtle at first, but I couldn't ignore how it softened when he spoke to me, like he was saying something that only I was meant to hear, something that felt personal, intimate. I too found myself paying closer attention to him. The way his muscles would stretch in the morning, his body moving effortlessly as he woke up, the subtle grace in his movements. I couldn't help but notice how his fingers would absent-mindedly run through his hair when he was concentrating, as though lost in thought. And his smile, there was something about it. It wasn't just a simple curve of his lips. It was the way it lingered just a little longer than necessary, as if he were savoring the moment, and it made my heart skip a beat every time. One night, after a particularly grueling day, I was sitting at the dining table, my laptop open in front of me, trying to push through work. The apartment was quiet, the soft hum of the city just audible through the windows. Jordan walked in, stretching his arms above his head, a familiar routine for him after a long day. His eyes landed on me, and he tilted his head slightly. "You're still up?" he asked, his voice low and lazy, the kind of voice that made everything sound like it was part of a private conversation, just for the two of us. "Yeah," I sighed, rubbing my temples as I leaned back in my chair. "Work's been crazy." He crossed the room with that effortless grace of his, leaning against the counter, his gaze never leaving me. "You know you push yourself too hard," he said, his tone softer than usual, almost like he was concerned, genuinely concerned, instead of just making an offhand comment. I couldn't help but chuckle, trying to break the tension. "Smirk," says the guy who wakes up at 6 a.m. to work out every morning. He laughed, his easy smile spreading across his face, and sat down across from me. His eyes still fixed on me with a look I couldn't quite place. "Touché, but still you should take a break," he said, his voice holding a trace of something more. There was an intensity in the way he said it, something that made me pause. There was something different in the air between us now. Thicker, heavier. I hesitated for a moment before closing my laptop, my mind suddenly clouded with a feeling I couldn't quite explain. "Maybe you're right," I finally muttered, my voice softer than usual. For a long moment, neither of us moved, and the silence hung in the air like an unspoken question, something unacknowledged yet undeniable. Then, as if on impulse, Jordan reached across the table, his hand moving with slow deliberation. He tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers brushing against my skin in a touch that was gentle but full of meaning. "You're always in your own world, Maya," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I wonder if you ever slow down enough to notice what's right in front of you." His words hung in the air between us, charged with something I couldn't put my finger on. It was as if he was daring me to see something more than what we had always been. His touch lingered, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was ready to ignore the pull between us any longer. I should have said something. I should have laughed it off, made a joke, teased him, anything to break the tension. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum, the steady thrum of my pulse echoing in my ears. The silence between us felt heavier now, more tangible, like an unspoken truth hanging in the air. The tension didn't fade or dissipate with time. It only grew, thickened, wrapping itself around every moment we shared, lingering in the smallest gestures, the briefest glances. Each passing day felt like an unraveling, a slow progression toward something I wasn't sure I was ready for. Then one evening, as if the storm itself mirrored the storm inside me, the weather shifted. A thick cloud cover rolled in, and heavy rain began to drum against the windows, the sound amplified by the occasional crack of distant thunder. I had curled up on the couch, wrapped tightly in a soft blanket, trying to escape the oppressive weight of my thoughts by losing myself in a movie. The flickering light from the TV cast shadows across the room, but I couldn't focus on the screen anymore. My mind kept returning to the same place, him. That was when Jordan appeared, stepping into the room with his usual quiet confidence. He didn't say anything at first, just slid onto the couch beside me, closer than usual, almost brushing against me. His presence was warm, familiar, but now it felt different, more intense, as if the boundaries between us were blurring. "Mind if I join?" His voice was casual, though there was something in the way he asked that made it feel like an invitation, not just to sit, but to something more. Something unspoken. I shrugged, trying to keep my tone light, even though my heart was racing. "Sure." It was all I could manage, the words slipping out like it was nothing, when in reality, everything felt like it was changing in that moment. We sat there in silence, the only sounds the soft murmur of the movie and the rhythm of the rain against the windows. But I wasn't watching the movie anymore. Couldn't. Every shift in his position, every breath he took, seemed to echo through me, as though I could feel the heat radiating from his body, the subtle change in the atmosphere every time he moved. His proximity was almost intoxicating, drawing my attention away from everything else, until it was just the two of us, together yet not quite. Then, as if to pull us further out of our usual comfort zone, the power flickered and then went out completely, leaving us in a thick blanket of darkness. The sudden stillness was jarring, amplifying the tension that had already been hanging between us. "Well, that's convenient," Jordan muttered, his voice light and laced with amusement, as though the situation were nothing more than a minor inconvenience, but I could feel the undercurrent of something deeper in the words. I laughed nervously, the sound too high-pitched in the quiet, trying to ease the tightening knot in my stomach. "Guess we're stuck like this for a while." My attempt at humor didn't quite reach my eyes, and I was sure he noticed. The distance between us had somehow collapsed, and now there was nothing but the thick silence stretching out before us. Jordan shifted beside me, and I could feel the change in the air. It was as though the very space between us was charged, pulsing with a quiet intensity. He turned toward me, the outline of his face barely visible in the dim light filtering through the rain-streaked windows. I could feel his eyes on me, steady and unwavering, but there was something in them that made my breath catch. Something I hadn't noticed before. "You okay?" His voice was softer than before, almost like he was searching for something, trying to gauge whether I felt the same pull he seemed to. "Yeah." My voice came out much quieter than I expected, a soft whisper in the dark. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I was okay. Not really. I could feel his gaze, steady and intense, and it seemed to reach right through me. Then, as if the storm outside had somehow made him bolder, he asked a question that made everything inside me still. "Maya, have you ever thought about what it would be like if things were different between us?" His words hung in the air between us, a question that had been lingering unspoken for far too long. And in that moment I knew this was the moment everything had been building toward. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my pulse quickening as 1,000 thoughts rushed through my mind. But before I could find the words, the storm outside seemed to answer for us. A loud clap of thunder shook the apartment, the sound so sharp and sudden that it made me jump. My heart leapt into my throat, and in that split second, without thinking, I grabbed his arm, my fingers curling around the warmth of his skin, pulling him closer to me instinctively. And just like that, we were closer than ever. The world outside, the storm, the noise, faded into the background. The only thing that mattered was the space between us, now so small, and the sudden shift that had occurred in that one accidental touch. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, as if we were both waiting for something, waiting for the other to make the next move, to say the next words. Then, slowly, as if time had slowed around us, Jordan reached up, his fingers gently grazing my cheek. The soft touch sent a jolt of electricity through me, and my breath caught in my throat. He didn't say anything at first, just let his fingers linger there, tracing the curve of my face with an intensity that made everything else fade into the background. "You're always in your own world, Maya," he murmured, his voice low and full of meaning, like every word was a question he wanted answered. "Sometimes I wonder if you ever slow down enough to notice what's right in front of you." His words hung in the air, rich with something unspoken, something I had been denying, and suddenly, I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending that I hadn't already noticed exactly what was right in front of me. "Maya." His voice was barely a whisper, the sound of it sending a shiver down my spine. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning, as if they carried the weight of everything that had been left unsaid between us. I could have pulled away. I could have laughed it off, brushed it off as nothing, changed the subject, or pretended like none of this was happening, like we were still just the same two people we had been before. But I didn't. 'Cause deep down I knew. I knew everything had already changed. I could feel it in the air, in the way his gaze lingered a little too long, in the silence that stretched out between us like a living thing. It was no longer just a fleeting moment. Something was different, something had shifted, and there was no pretending we could go back to what we were before. The next morning the apartment felt different. There was a weight to the air, a quiet tension that hummed in every corner of the room. I woke up before Jordan, the soft light of dawn creeping through the curtains and casting long shadows across the floor. I found myself sitting by the window, a steaming cup of coffee cradled between my hands as I stared out at the rain-soaked city below. The world outside seemed so distant, almost unreal, as if it were happening in a place that had no connection to the storm of thoughts and emotions swirling inside me. My mind raced, a blur of questions, doubts, and feelings I couldn't name. Everything was tangled in ways I couldn't quite untangle, like a knot too tight to loosen, and all I could do was sit there, lost in the moment, feeling the weight of it all press in around me. When Jordan finally woke up, I could hear him moving around in his room, the soft shuffle of feet across the floor, the quiet murmur of the shower turning on. It was only when he stepped into the kitchen, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, that I looked up, my breath catching for a brief second. He paused at the doorway as if uncertain, before offering me a small, hesitant smile. It was the kind of smile that spoke volumes, like there were so many things he wanted to say but couldn't quite find the words for. "Hey," he said softly. His voice a little rough from sleep but somehow more sincere than usual. "Hey," I replied, my fingers tightening around the warmth of my coffee mug. For a moment, I wondered if we were going to pretend like nothing had happened, like the night before was just a figment of my imagination, a passing moment we could laugh off and forget. But then as he walked past me, there was that moment. Small, barely noticeable, but enough to send a jolt through me. As he passed, his hand brushed against mine, the touch brief but deliberate, lingering for just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It was nothing, or at least that's what I tried to tell myself, but in that moment I knew there was no going back. Because sometimes the most unexpected moments, the ones that seem small, insignificant even, are the ones that change everything. It wasn't the grand gestures, the sweeping declarations, or the perfect timing of a romantic moment. No, it was in the subtle, quiet things. The way he touched me without thinking, the way his eyes seemed to speak volumes when his words fell short. It was the kind of change that sneaks up on you, unnoticed at first, and then suddenly, you realize nothing is ever going to be the same again. Thank you for staying with us. If you find it interesting and useful, please subscribe, like, and share so you don't miss the next video. Thanks.